Welcome, everybody. This is GM Daniel Naroditsky. In this series, I'll be taking a look at some questions and pieces of advice that circulate on the internet and offering my thoughts on them. Let's jump in.
How to make plans in the middle game? This is a question that every single chess player is constantly asking me. How do I make plans?
I think a clarification is in order here. I think when most people new to chess think of plans, they think that a GM sits down and they know they know 30 moves ahead exactly what they're going to play. And they know my knight's going to go from H1 to A8 on move 40. But that's not the reality. I would say the average length of a plan in chess is something like 2 or 3 moves. Like just getting your knight from G1 to E5 is already a plan. So don't think of this as some sort of large scale thought process where you're thinking 10, 15 moves ahead. That does happen very rarely, but a plan is nothing more than just a maneuver or a very small operation. So it's not as grandiose of a term as you might think it is.
Number 4, learn from the old masters. Throughout my career, I feel that it's been very useful, but most of all, very interesting to read about how chess has developed over the years and to look at the games.
The phrase old masters is used pretty commonly by chess players, and as a player or a chess enthusiast who's newer to the game, you might wonder, does that refer to chess players who lived in the 1400s, in the time of the Mesozoic era, or, in the 1970s? Because old is a very, very relative term. And at least I don't think there's a set definition, but I think old masters generally refers to the world champions and the leading players who came, something like 1950 and before. So think Alexander Alekhine or Wilhelm Steinitz, the first world champion, and even Mikhail Tal, who was world champion in the 60s, can be lumped in that category. So there's no set definition. It just means the world champions and the top players who came before us and who represented a different era of chess development. Okay, to be honest, and I've heard this type of advice that I would put in the category of just like general psychology, and it's good to have the right mindset. It's good to be confident, but at the same time to not underestimate your opponent. At the same time, if you're a newer player, I would say you need to focus on what's happening on the board, and you need to try to implement very concrete pieces of advice. Like, it's much easier to implement don't double your pawns or keep your king safe than it is like implement tactics over strategy. So yes, definitely very good to respect your opponent, but not overestimate him. But I would say focus on implementing more actionable things on the chessboard.
Rule number 3, don't push your kingside pawns.
This reminds me of an old anecdote that my first chess coach shared. It's like one of those Soviet chess stories. The rumor goes that the world champion Tigran Petrosian was giving a simul, and he was playing same amateur, and he was the last man standing. And Petrosian barely won. And after the game, Tigran asks the guy, and you played so well for someone who only knows chess for 2 weeks, but one immodest question, why didn't you move your knights the whole game? And the guy said, I just haven't learned how to move them yet. So don't move your kingside pawns. I think that has to be qualified a little bit.
The question is how to punish mistakes by your opponents.
Man, I really wish I knew that. I'd probably be world champion.
This is a pretty general question, and here's how I'm going to answer it. I need you all to start thinking about mistakes in a different way, because mistakes can happen in a one-move situation. It's just a one-move blunder, a loss of a piece. Your opponent gives it away and you don't see it. Like, for example, just the dumbest example I can possibly give you, the 4-move checkmate, right? Like, that is how you'd punish if they didn't see it, by doing it. That's it. But there's also something not as dramatic. And in all your games, trust me, you're missing these opportunities. Both of you are, like, whatever level you are.
When you're a beginner, the focal point is always just to make sure that you're not blundering pieces and that you're taking pieces that your opponent is offering. That should be your complete focus until you're, about 900, 1000, and you've stopped committing, regular one-move blunders. And at that point, you can start focusing on not committing more subtle types of mistakes, which I think Levy is about to talk about. What is it? What does a mistake that's not a blunder look like?
This rule is that rooks like to be on open files and they like being connected. What that means exactly, so if I played rook b8 with black, This is what we call a semi-open file. A file is a vertical line on the board.
And in Russian, a file is literally referred to as a line. So good way to remember what a file is.
So an open file is when there's absolutely no pawns on it. A semi-open is one pawn. On this file, on C8, we would call it a closed file because there's more than one, there's two pawns. For files of the rook, the pieces don't matter. So bishops, rooks, queens, kings, they don't matter. Only pawns, because pawns are less likely to change files unless you're capturing and trading pawns. Putting your rooks on semi-open files is an easy way to activate them. And here's an example of how you would connect your rooks. If I move my queen here, they're now defending each other. While this doesn't seem like it makes a huge difference because you only moved your queen one square, it makes it easier to take out the other rook. So now black could maybe bring his rook up and double his rooks. Now both of his rooks are on the game, they're in a semi-open file, and they're much stronger. So this is the ideal way to develop your rooks. Of course, once you finish your opening development.
And doubling your rooks means putting both of them on the same file. I wouldn't worry if you're watching this and you're a newer player. You know, this distinction between semi-open files and open files is less important than understanding what a closed file is. If you put a rook on a file that contains one of your pawns, particularly if that pawn is on its initial square, that's often a bad place for the rook just because the rook is literally staring at one of your pawns. In a semi-open file, you're generally attacking a target. Like in Andrea's example here, the two black rooks are aiming at the white pawn on b2 and putting pressure on it. In the case of occupying an open file, you're often doing that in order to infiltrate your opponent's territory. Because there's nothing on the file, you're trying to directly access the second or the first rank of your opponent. Both of those things are very useful. Great piece of advice. You're often taught this in all beginner manuals to connect your rooks, to have your rooks looking at each other. This is part of the kind of things that you do in chess to make sure that your pieces are well coordinated, that your king is safe. You can consider it kind of like, you know, eating your vegetables or brushing your teeth at night. It just increases the likelihood that as the game progresses, you're going to be better equipped for the progression of the game than your opponent. When possible, definitely good practice to connect your rooks. So I think the first part of that is the most useful, especially as a newer player. You want to have an approximate opening repertoire, and you'll hear that phrase thrown around very often. Opening repertoire is just the set of openings that you normally play. Of course, it's good practice to try different openings out. You can try out d4, you can try out e4. And now with Chessable, it's very easy to learn an opening. But definitely as a newer player, you want to choose a set of openings that you play consistently because that allows you to learn them better and to understand the arising positions. Definitely try to settle on a specific set of openings that you play consistently, but feel free to explore.
1000 level, but if you're like 1100, trust me, there are blunders all over the place. Now, sometimes those blunders are one movers and they're crazy obvious, but sometimes the computer will go, oh, well, this is a big blunder because of a 3-move combo, which you're incapable of seeing because you're not at that level yet. So an example that I'll give you, for example, like again, here, in a Scandinavian defense, okay, this is what we have. The queen rotates out this way, d4, both players are developing here. It's really nothing special. Black trades. That is an inaccuracy. That's not a mistake. It's not good to give away the bishop there for reasons we've already discussed. It's a very open board. Okay, and now in this position, white finishes development with bishop to g5. For some of you watching, the move is obvious here for black. For others, not so much. Some of you might be thinking, okay, is this bishop putting me under any pressure? Should I castle? But I'm going to introduce something to you called the checklist. And every move, your opponent makes a move, you go, what do they want? Okay, then you go, you identify what they want, whether it's scary or not. Can I create a check, which is the most forcing move in chess? No. Can I capture anything? Oh! Attacks. The last one would be attack. Can I attack something?
Now, this is a great device for newer players, and when you're just learning, I'm not going to go into like the psychology here, but there's this concept of system 1 and system 2. It's from a famous book written a couple of years ago, and it basically says that when you're a beginner at something, you're using a very like effortful process. You're like, is this move a blunder? Can I give a check? Can I make a mate? And this skill becomes automated. It transitions to a more intuitive way of thinking, system 2, when you gain a lot of practice. So if you're a beginner watching this and you're like, how do GMs see this in a millisecond when I have to go through this laborious process? Remember that this eventually becomes totally automated. Like, you look at a move and automatically you're detecting whether it's a blunder to a very high degree of accuracy.
I think the games since the Capablanca Aliekin match in 1927, I think ever since then, chess has been played at a very high level, and you can learn a lot from all of the great masters.
Yeah, that's definitely true. The Capablanca Alekhine series of matches was fascinating. The match that Magnus is spotlighting here was played in Buenos Aires in 1927, and it represented a real clash of styles. Alexander Alekhine was a very sharp tactical player. Capablanca was considered one of the greatest positional and endgame players of all time. And you have to remember that when these matches were played, for example, Capablanca wrote an op-ed in the New York Times where he was complaining about how modern chess has become and how much information there is to learn and how chess is dying. And you have to remember that at every era of chess's development, the players living in that era thought that they were the most modern and the most developed chess players of all time. And truly, the level of chess displayed in this match is extremely high. The openings are pretty modern. It's not like they were, fighting with sticks and stones. So watching these games, it's not like you will immediately recognize that they were played 100 years ago. The players of that time were actually really, really good. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed my advice, and a huge shout out to Botez and Levy and young Magnus for their amazing instructional videos. If there is a piece of advice that you would like me to take a look at and react to, please post it in the comments, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.